time then, welcome to my book corner. Today we have another review video for you, and this is for an audiobook, specifically The Envoys of War by Dave Lawson, and this is narrated by Laurence Stirling Knott. Thank you so much to the author for providing me the audiobook for this, it's really appreciated. As always, we shall take a look at the story, the characters, the world building and the presentation before my thoughts at the end, so let's dive straight in. Okay, so first off I need to mention the blurb for this because it mentions something in the blurb that I think does capture this really well. A rollicking fancy adventure for fans of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I am a D&D fan, and yeah, this kind of feels like a D&D party in points. We have two primary characters from the outset. One is Jen, who is a sword-swinging warrior who basically likes to not think too much. They go around, drink wine, stab things. And they're quite happy with that. And their close friend, who is Cordyn, who is a stereotypical bard. This is somebody who talks themselves into and out of many, many situations with an almost unnatural degree of care, and is kind of being hunted by multiple wives or their husbands for reasons you can probably imagine. And they are tasked to deliver military intelligence to a friendly power during wartime. But this isn't the real meaning of the mission, as Jem finds out the real reason for this is that they want her to investigate her close friend Cordyn because of some irregularities in his spending, and they believe that he is in fact a double agent for somebody else. Now, also worth mentioning that Cordyn is a spy for their own nation, so which can occasionally cause a few issues, and what you then have is them going off and hitting a few bumps along the road, either where Cordyn talks them into trouble while trying to talk them into acceptance, or other situations, and a few things that they see that don't quite add up. And this begins to introduce other people that then join their group, one of which has a history with Cordyn or their family, and someone who fails so spectacularly to be sweet-talked that they almost become a challenge for Cordyn themselves as well. And you have this evolving relationship between the two and this new group as things begin to then spiral more out of control as they find revelations within the territories that they're travelling through that shouldn't be there, and starts to prick on their consciences. Consciences? Is that a word? I don't know. It is now. Pricks their conscience to start to get involved. Overall, this is a very, very, very solid storytelling trope of two friends, one under investigation, straining the relationship as new people get brought in and they begin to see things outside of their jurisdiction that they cannot turn away from. And it does make a really compelling narrative, which then drives some of the character work forward, which we'll touch on next. So the D&D feel really swings into place when you hit the characters, in that these do fit a number of character archetypes from the game, and that sort of cobbled together riding by the seat of your pants and not knowing what's going on feel really does spread through the book. But it's a disservice to say they are just those archetypes and not full-blooded characters in themselves. They are, out of the characters that we meet, Cordyn probably gets the most backfill in terms of story. We find out a little bit about where his priorities truly lie, and also how close he sees Jen as a friend. On Jen's side, you have the fact that they're grappling with the fact that, again, Cordyn is their good friend, and they completely understand why Cordyn is so controversial in many regards to people around them. He does get himself in trouble a lot, but also they're just friends, really good friends in fact, and she cannot really bring herself to believe that he's a traitor. And you have this warring thing going on in her own head at times of, can he really do that? Why would he do that? Balanced against the fact that his actions sometimes reinforce those beliefs. And you have this real internal turmoil of, what should she do? Now, on top of that, you have a number of other characters that we meet, who I am not going to name, but There's a lady they meet who seems very, very salt of the earth, but has a few things going on, which then leads the party astray as they go on off on basically what is a side quest in many regards that becomes the main point of the story, who sees right through Cordyn's words straight away. And as their characters develops, we discovered that just like him, she has a similar ability with words, but coming from a different base. Whereas Cordyn very much feels like they're coming from a highly educated base and working down. She feels like someone working like grassroots, moving up. And it's a really interesting way of looking at the two characters next to each other and how their differences versus their similarities play against each other. Fascinating. And also, you then have the fourth member who joins the group, who is the magic user, basically. But they have a history with Cordyn, or at least with Cordyn's family. So very intelligent, very calculated, spending their time to figure out what's going on and find the best possible moment, but still having a moral compass of their own, which briefly aligns with the parties and going along with it, which I also really appreciate. And finally, you have my favourite archetype in a story like this, which is like the urchin child. Heart of gold, wants to help, but gets into all the sneaky places. Love all this. And then when you balance this against the antagonists feel one step towards caricature and over the top, but not necessarily in a bad way, in a way that really, really works here. It's not to the mustache twirling villain levels, but there's something underlying with all the villains of this piece that makes them feel slightly larger than life. And what's really interesting in that is, in the grand scheme of things, none of these characters are main characters in the world. These are just characters moving through the world while the big stuff's happening elsewhere and around them. And they end up making a mark within that, and we don't know the full sort of fallout from that by the end of this. But these are just normal people doing normal lives. This is not your typical hero's journey. And I really, really do appreciate that as well. And there's a lot of complexity towards how these groups sort of intermingle. And I'm really interested to see where it goes in book 2. I really like the way the world is presented here. I get the impression that this is 16th to 17th century UK or equivalent. One thing I don't get is quite the sense of scale for the countries involved. I can't quite tell if they're full-size countries or slightly smaller fiefdoms, so to speak. I'm leaning towards somewhere in the middle, and that might be just because I've forgotten a little bit in the text where it talks about travel distance. Or it might equally be that I've just not seen a map. Both things are possible. I really like a few things that this does pull and look at, specifically around class systems. You have the political class, which likes of Cordyn come from. You have the way that soldiers are viewed. You have the landed gentry and their opinion of people. Slavery does still exist in the world as well, potentially, which is worth noting here. You have plenty of political intrigue between 4 main nations, as it appears to be here, one of which is quite standoffish, and some things that are going on between some of those nations where there's something lying behind the plans of what's going on. Really like that as well. And the fact that you have this discrepancy of class does play into the story in places, especially with Cordyn when he tries to speak to certain people, and they kind of see through him straight away as this sort of toff who is just trying to talk themselves out or into things with honeyed words, and a lack of patience and sensibilities for such things, which, being from the north of England, is something that you kind of still see at quite a regular occurrence here today. On top of that, you do have a magic system, and what's really interesting here is, as a whole, this feels like quite a low magic setting, but there is magic in the world, and it is a fascinating system to look at, focused around the use of liquid water specifically. Mages in this world can do a number of things, and a number of these things are not well known. From the basic obvious ones of freezing water or water in the air to make ice shards to fling at people, to literally freezing people in place, to more subtle magics which suggest a far more clinical level of knowledge than you would expect, to affect things like brain chemistry, to affect memory, and it's all a really, really well done and fascinating system. And I can't wait to see if this focus on water is unique to like this area of the world, or if other forms of magic that work outside of that are elsewhere. I'm not sure, but really interesting to not go down a full elemental route at this stage and focus just on one, and the whole breadth of what that can do is really interesting to read and seems to be really, really thought out, which I highly appreciate. On to presentation then. And first off, I want to talk about the pacing and the story structure of this, because I actually really, really like it. It does feel a bit D&D in some regards, in that this feels quite low level. This is normal characters going about their normal lives or doing a normal job, and then getting sidetracked by world events and getting more and more involved as those world events become more and more prominent. Much like how a D&D party will go off on a first very basic quest and then get sidetracked and drawn into bigger things as their characters grow. And this does a good job of kind of emulating that level of progression in a far more linear fashion. But not just that, I like the way that things do progress here based on the moral pull at the characters. And by the time we have the full party of characters together who are still strangers and still have very, very, very weird sort of interlacing skills, you have the idea of them all ending up on the same page, not because they're all going in the same direction, but because for different reasons their moral compass has been pricked, and they're all on the same page for different reasons. And there's still a level of uneasiness there, and there's still a level of trust, but the escalation keeps happening and they keep kind of working together, even though there's a lack of trust there. And as the world begins to open out, this really does drive home how important these groups, this small group, is as a unit with their different skill sets. And also, this does a really good job of widening the worldview as well, going from a very basic deliver a letter to we're in the middle of a war zone and there's betrayals going on and magic everywhere, and yeah, there's giant wolves. It's a fascinating way to deal with the escalation, and by the end you reach to the conclusion of the book. There's still a bit of a cloud over what happens next in terms of where these characters go and how or if they will continue to travel together or indeed work together into the future, which I really, really like, that level of ambiguity. It gives just enough of a tug for the next book without it being a full-blown cliffhanger, which I really, really like. Of course, this is an audiobook, and I have to say the narration is spot on. Laurence Stirling Knott does an amazing job, especially in terms of the accent work. Now, I need to mention here, I am kind of tired in general of the whole Northern UK accents in fantasy thing, because it's everywhere. But Laurence does an amazing job throughout this in catching the unique identities via using sort of not just different voices but different dialects for the characters to make it clear who is talking, and I really, really appreciated that. And also I really like the fact that when the characters sort of switched into their internal monologues, the voice didn't change, because quite often what you get in audiobooks is a character will speak and then you'll hear the thoughts in their head, and the thoughts in the head are in narrator voice, not character voice, whereas here it remained in character voice, and I really, really enjoyed that. And it added a level of humanity to a number of characters really, really well, especially from, in my mind, to Jen. And it also did a really good job of highlighting the difference in social backgrounds of the characters as well. Again, Jen and Cordyn show this really, really well. And this also sort of links down to a character called Topper, who we meet later on. Absolutely loved the voice work on this, and it actually really sold the book to me more and more as I went through, because there's just a level of nuance there that I don't always see in audio production, which I really appreciated. So overall, really strong story structure, really well paced, and exceptionally strong narration work. Final thoughts then, and I really enjoyed this. This is book one in a series, and as a result, book one generally have certain limitations in there. This is no exception, but this does an amazing job at dealing with those limitations to such an extent that I've already gone out and pre-ordered the next novella from the author, which I believe is a prequel to this, called Envoys of Havoc, which is out later this month because I enjoyed this so much. And also, I have to say, the audio work, the narration is spot on. The performance throughout is really, really, really strong, especially in terms of giving the unique voice to the characters. The pacing is solid with very, very brief spurts of action, which are really well written and well told. And overall, I think this is a really good book one of a fantasy series. I give this an easy 4.25 stars out of 5. If you're looking for an indie fantasy, this is a good place to start. This was really, really good. But that's my thoughts on the Envoys of War. What indie books have you read recently? Any recommendations, let me know in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.